Laura and Pete sat in the waiting area for Flight 3425 to Bali, holding hands. After all the preparations and arrangements, it was nice to finally get through all the formalities. Laura closed her eyes. She needed this holiday. It had been a long year. Yes, 2 weeks of sunshine. Just what the doctor ordered. Pete let go of her hand to take his phone out of his pocket when he heard a new message alert. By the way, Laura, don't forget to put your phone in flight mode. I didn't bring my phone. Pete was distracted looking at his phone screen. Laura was admiring his face when she noticed it tense up. What is it, Pete? Pete nervously handed her his phone, and she read, Peter Ware, lay a hand on that woman and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. God, Pete, you idiot. You should have warned your wife, she knows. Laura walked over to Pete and looked around at everyone in the living room. It's impossible, Laura. I packed everything last night after she went to bed and put the suitcases straight in the car. She was as nice to me as ever. It can't be her. Then it must be the wrong number, Pete. No, it mentions my name. Maybe it's your husband? Don't be silly. He doesn't know anything either. He thinks I've gone away for a 2-week course. Besides, how would he know your name and number? We've been very careful. No one knows about us. Whose number is it? I don't know anyone. I have great friends, and I don't think they'd want to play a joke on me. Let's do this. I'll call Penny, and you call your husband. See if they've noticed anything unusual. Laura watched as Pete dialed the speed dial number. No one answered, so he left a message saying he missed her already. Pete hung up and looked at Laura in confusion. Are you going to call your husband? I didn't bring my mobile. You can use mine. Laura reached for the outstretched phone, but then they both realized how silly it was. For the first time, Laura began to regret her decision. The rest of their conversation was interrupted by the boarding announcement. They stood in line together, but no longer felt comfortable holding hands in public. Laura noticed that Pete was looking around at the passengers, searching for familiar faces. Laura was slightly amused by this. He continued his search as they made their way to their seats. They took their seats, and as soon as they sat down, Laura took his arm and rested her head on his shoulder. Why didn't you bring your mobile phone, Laura? It's part of my clever plan. You'll be proud of me. I'll show you when we're in the air. Half an hour later, the plane gained altitude and Laura took her laptop out of her bag. She turned it on and opened a Word document. I've invested in our future, my lover. When my husband goes to bed tonight, he'll find a letter from me. If he doesn't agree with what it says, we won't lose anything. But if he does, this trip will be the start of a new life for both of us. Here's a copy. She handed the computer to Pete. My dear husband, I love you and only you. And I have loved you since we met 25 years ago. I hope to spend the next 25 years and more with you. This is what I have always wanted and sincerely desired until now. I love you more and more every day and have happily devoted my life to caring for you and our wonderful children. Except for a few visits to friends, I have asked for almost nothing for myself. I know that you love me and always want me to be happy and content. Because we love each other, I want to make you a proposal. I have deliberately approached this in such a way that you have 2 weeks to think about my idea. If we did this face to face, there would be a great danger that you would start acting macho and say something we couldn't live with. I can't take that risk. For the same reason I left my mobile phone so you can't contact me for 2 weeks. I'm not taking any classes and no one knows where I am, so don't waste your time trying to reach me. Darling, you are a wonderful lover and I never tire of your embrace. However, I miss sex with other people so much that I am willing to risk your anger to do what I do. Before you get angry, look at the situation in context. I am going away for 2 weeks with a friend for work. I have never cheated on you and would never do so without your full blessing. My proposal is this. With your blessing, I would like to engage in this with other men. I feel that my needs have grown so much that one man, even one as talented as you, cannot satisfy them. It will never be someone you know, and I promise to always be careful. In fact, I will be so careful that you won't even know when or where unless you want to. At the slightest hint that someone we know suspects what I am doing, I will stop immediately. You will always have me when you want me, and nothing will change in that regard. You are my husband, and your needs will always come first. I want you to be sure that this will not change my feelings for you or our intimacy. In short, it will not affect us in any way. Please think about this over the next 2 weeks, dear. If you love me as much as you say you do, you will take this opportunity to prove it. I know how much you love me, and that knowledge will be with me every time I fall asleep at night while I am away. That is why I trust you to indulge me now. Please, dear, think about this over the next 2 weeks. If you say no, I will respect your decision and be grateful for the opportunity to talk more. I will try not to take offense at your words and your implied distrust. If you say yes, all you have to do is say yes, and we won't talk about it anymore. Although I would be happy to talk if you want to. Your loving wife, Laura Pete, finished reading and just said, "Wow. Yes, good, right?" I have to admit that I borrowed many of the words from a story I read on an erotic literature website. The author is Big Guy 33, and he wrote a story called We Need to Talk. Why did you call it an investment in our future? Don't you understand? I asked my husband for permission. If he agrees, then when we get back, we can go on living without feeling guilty. Laura added silently, "Well, I can go on living. 2 weeks with you, and I'll be sure I don't need you anymore. But your replacement? That's a different story. Are you so sure he'll agree?" "Of course. I made it seem like he had a choice, but that's just so he can convince himself he's in control. If he dares to say no, we'll have to keep hiding like before." Well, how does that sound? Not bad, decisive and logical. However, he will never make such a decision based on logic. I hope he's not a real man, otherwise it will be a little offensive. What? He can't be offended by anything in this letter. I spent several days writing it. Yes, but you have to understand that you could spend a whole year and still risk offending him. As a woman, you'll never understand how a man's brain works. The main thing I got from this letter is that he can no longer satisfy you, and that no matter how good he is, he never will. You need to know, Laura, that every man is a little paranoid about his work. The thought that he might leave you for someone else who might be better or more beautiful only fuels that paranoia. To be honest, Laura, I can only see two reactions to him reading this letter. The first is to give up and throw in the towel. The second is to get in the ring. Well, I think you're wrong. I know my husband. He'll appreciate my honesty and think seriously about it. If I ask him before I do anything, it'll be completely risk-free. Pete looked at his future mistress and thought how strongly she believed in her own stupidity. He already saw her in a new light. Of course, he had lied to get permission from his wife, but Laura's blatant lies and manipulation of her husband alarmed him. Partly out of genuine curiosity and partly out of malice, he asked the next question. How did the story with the big guy end for Laura? Did the lady drink? He got his answer long before she opened her mouth. Her face suddenly became very serious. No, her husband kicked her out of the house. To distract her from doubts about the correctness of his actions, Peter changed the subject. After all the effort and expense of this trip, the last thing he wanted was for her conscience to awaken and for her to actually do what was written in the letter. An innocent holiday. Did I tell you about that strange guy I saw at international registration? He was standing about 7 meters away from me while I was waiting in line. When he noticed me looking at him, he just stared at me and ran his index finger across my throat as if cutting it. I looked around to see if he was doing the same thing to someone behind me, but there was no one there. It was creepy. Laura asked, "Yeah, what did he look like? The world is full of strange, disturbing people." That's the thing, Laura. He looked like a normal guy. Over 6 feet tall, dark hair, goatee. Peter fell silent as Laura sat up abruptly and started looking for her laptop again. She turned it on and went to some files. A photo appeared on the screen showing her and a man standing in front of a house. Her voice trembling with excitement, she asked, "Is that him?" It could be him, Laura. He looks a lot like him, but I can't be sure." Laura looked at Peter with interest. Did he have a motive to lie to her? Was he afraid that if she found out that her husband had exposed their game then? For the first time, it occurred to Laura that Peter was a man capable of cheating on his wife, and therefore untrustworthy. What was he wearing, Pete? That's a question for women, Laura. Men don't pay attention to what other men are wearing. Didn't you say he dropped you off at the domestic terminal? Yes, I did. I convinced him to just drop me off and leave. When I saw him driving away, I took a bus to the international terminal. So he drove back to his car, drove to the international terminal, parked, and then knew who to run after in the check-in line. That's unlikely, Laura. I think it was probably just a random psychopath. He knew he had to distract Laura, who looked far from convinced. Is that your house in the photo, Laura? Laura, who also wanted to distract herself and was used to compliments about her home, switched to autopilot. Yes, that's the one. Beautiful, isn't it? We bought this house by the sea as an investment. It's very cool and narrow. You wouldn't believe that this house can be folded up, would you? My husband spent 15 years on it, but he was always adding, renovating, updating, and repairing things around it. You should see it from the inside. He's an artist. and every room has frescoes on a specific theme. The bathroom and living room have a nautical theme. The study has a business theme. When you walk into the study, the atmosphere says work, and you work. I won't tell you what the theme is in the bedroom. We've won all kinds of awards for the interior design and for how the house uses the land. There's even a stream running under the house. The conversation turned to their families, a topic they had avoided in their relationship until now. They talked about Pete's 2 children, age 6 and 8. Laura told her about her 3 children. Sarah, a 23-year-old woman who had just graduated from law school and was working as a real estate lawyer, and her 2 children who lived with her, 16-year-old Daniel and 13-year-old Larry. Laura didn't know this, but she desperately tried to distract herself. She managed to do so for a while. Then she took out a notebook and wrote, "Lawyer, house, and children." Not knowing if her husband was watching her, she couldn't make any plans for him. However, she knew she had to protect herself by securing her home and family. After the couple fell silent, Laura began to berate herself for her cowardice and for not thinking about her situation and the possible consequences. She reconstructed the chronology of events. On Thursday evening, she had packed her things, trying not to take anything personal or unnecessary for a weekend between 2 weekly courses. That evening, her husband had behaved completely normally. On Friday, she went to work at the usual time. Her company car needed to be repaired, so she arranged with her husband to pick her up on Friday afternoon. He came to the reception area, waited for her to gather her things, and drove her home. They had dinner with the children, took them to their grandparents, and then worked on the car until late at night. On Saturday morning, they got up early and drove to the airport. Laura remembered how nervous she had been when she suggested that her husband just drop her luggage off at the check-in counter and leave. He usually stayed until the plane took off. She felt relieved when he agreed right away. She watched him until he pulled into the parking lot, then waited until he drove away. Now his eagerness to leave took on a darker meaning. She compared his behavior last night and today to her careful planning. Damn it, no one at work knew anything except that she was taking her annual leave, and her husband didn't know any of her colleagues. He couldn't have known what she was planning. The message that came to Pete's phone was a joke from a friend, a guy who had been looking at him in the check-in area. A random weirdo. Relax, Laura. What would happen if he found out? She had lied to him about her destination, so what? The letter said she was traveling with a friend from work, but it didn't say whether that friend was a man or a woman. She didn't realize she had closed her eyes until she opened them again. She imagined her husband finding out about her final destination at the airport and realized how it would look to him. The deception would make it seem as if she had run away specifically to hide. That in itself was serious, but with some skill it could be explained away. However, combined with the contents of the letter, there was no room for doubt. Laura spent the rest of the flight trying to draw as little attention to herself as possible. Her first task was to destroy the letter lying under her pillow, 20,500 kilometers away from her. Her second task was to convince herself that she was worrying for nothing. Laura, always ready to anticipate every possible scenario, wrote a long letter to Sarah, knowing she wouldn't be able to send it before she reached Bali. In it, she begged her daughter to go home and do 2 things. The first was to take her phone and switch it to Pete's number. She decided she would feel awkward telling anyone she had forgotten it, and she had bought a prepaid phone for the trip. The second was to retrieve the letter from under her father's pillow. She begged her not to read it, as it was very personal, written between husband and wife. Mother and daughter were very close, so she knew she could trust her not only to follow all the instructions, but also to handle the matter tactfully. Laura also asked Sarah to confirm receipt of the letter and let her know when she had done what she had been asked. As soon as Pete and Laura got off the plane at Denpasar Airport, Laura sent the letter and then, assuming that her husband would not check the caller ID, called him from Pete's phone. None of her calls were answered, either then or during the hour it took to get through customs and to the hotel. This had never happened before, and alarm bells rang in Laura's head. Before the taxi pulled up to the hotel, Sarah called Pete's phone and confirmed that she had done everything as requested. Laura managed to dodge several questions about what was going on. When Sarah asked if everything was okay with her father, her answer horrified her mother. Her father had called and said he needed to think about some things and that he was taking the other children to his cottage in the country. Sarah was going to join them in the evening. Laura asked her husband what he was doing for the weekend, and his answer, of course, did not include the cottage. Worse, the cottage was isolated from all forms of 21st century communication. Laura was so puzzled that she let her daughter call without asking any questions. Chapter 2. Laura's husband had just prepared a barbecue dinner for his 3 children at the cottage. They were begging him to take them camping so they could cook their favorite wallaby stew over a campfire the next day. Sarah felt that her father had been distracted since she arrived, but she didn't press the issue. They sat down at the table for their family dinner. Sarah starts the conversation. Is it because of Mum, Dad? Yes, she's been acting strangely for a couple of months. She seems emotionally detached. And yesterday and this morning, I found out something strange. The sense of unease that had enveloped the room was heightened by his father's sigh as he finished his sentence. They knew him as a strong but cheerful man who was rarely serious. They waited. Your mother told me she's going away on a business trip for 2 weeks. All 3 children confirmed that she had told them. Yesterday afternoon, she asked me to pick her up from work, and I did. Standing in the reception area, I saw through the glass of one of the offices that she was talking to a man in his office. Something about the way they stood and looked at each other seemed strange to me. She didn't come out for more than 5 minutes, so I looked into the reception area. There were photos of all the company executives on the wall. I recognized the man she was talking to. His name is Peter Ware. I took his business card from the reception desk. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs. I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I looked in your mother's handbag. There I found her passport and, leafing through it, discovered a visa to Indonesia issued 3 weeks ago. I remembered how she had been reading a brochure about Bali last month. Their father fell silent and looked around the room, clearly thinking about what to say. Bali is in Indonesia, not in another state. It's abroad. I didn't say anything to your mother, but accusing someone of cheating without proof, especially someone you love unconditionally, is going too far. Sarah joined the conversation. We know, Dad. We were raised with your and Mum's values, remember? Never cheat, never lie, always treat people with respect until they lose that respect, and then just walk away quietly. Yes, that's why what happened this morning is so hard to understand, let alone talk about. The gloomy atmosphere in the room intensified. They gave Dad as much time as he needed to collect his thoughts and decide what to say and how to say it. This morning, your mum asked me to just drive her to the domestic terminal and leave. She said she was nervous about leaving you home alone for so long. I agreed and drove straight to the international terminal. I waited there, near the check-in desk for flights to Bali, and saw Mr. Peter Ware checking in. I hid and continued to watch. 15 minutes later, your mother appeared and checked in as well. I was too stunned to meet her gaze. You think? Yes, Sarah. I think your mother lied to me, and in fact lied to all of us and flew to Bali to meet the man she works with. Their father turned away, but it was obvious to all 3 children that he was in great pain. They had never seen this great man cry before and were willing to pay almost anything not to see his obvious pain. One by one, starting with Daniel, they hugged their father. Sarah took the initiative again. What are you going to do, Dad? I just don't know, kids. But I do know that if she ever sleeps with another man, it's over for us. Fidelity is the foundation of marriage, and any violation of that is unforgivable. If she hasn't slept with him and isn't sleeping with him, I still don't know if I can forgive her for her betrayal. So all I've done so far is let them both know that if they touch each other, there will be trouble. That way, I can put off making a decision until I'm ready to make it. Does that make sense? Sarah nodded to everyone, then told him something he didn't know. Mum left her phone at home, Dad. She didn't get your message. I know how to get in touch with her. Do you want me to tell her to leave that bastard alone? No, Sarah. I want her to respond for her own reasons. A decision made out of fear of the consequences is not a decision. She needs to have the right motivation. What number did she give you to contact her? Sarah took out her phone and opened a long message from Laura. She read the first 6 digits to her father, and he read the last 4 to her, which he found on a business card he took out of his pocket. With this simple action, all 4 people in the room were convinced of the absolute truth of his story. Silence fell. That's not all, Dad. Mum asked me to get a letter for you from under the pillow at home. She reached into her bag, took out the letter, and handed it to him. Everyone waited for him to read it. He didn't want to read it aloud, knowing what it said. Young Larry had reached a dead end. Dad, this letter is about our family. We always made all the important decisions as a family. You have to tell us about it. Dave looked at his youngest son and realized he had never felt so proud. Here he was, along with his brothers and sisters, in the midst of the greatest crisis their family had ever faced, and he had handled it better than his own father. They had all handled it. They hugged again, and then Dave began to read. He read the letter 3 times, underlining the third paragraph twice. Without the third paragraph, it was a perfectly legitimate request from a wife to her husband and, taken at face value, a mature suggestion. However, one sentence in the third paragraph distorted the entire meaning of the letter. I'm going away for 2 weeks with a friend on business. I have never been unfaithful to you and never will be without your full blessing. One proven lie made the rest of the letter suspect or simply false. After an hour of mature discussion, the motives of the mother and wife turned out to be surprisingly close to the truth. When other solutions were rejected, an obvious conclusion was reached and a course of action was decided upon. Depending on the answer to one question, the mother probably no longer deserved to be a member of their family. Dave tried his best to defend the absent party. Listen, kids, if a crime was committed, it was committed against me, your mother's husband. You mustn't let that affect your feelings for her. Once again, little Larry spoke for everyone. No, Dad. The moment she lied to all of us, she chose herself. Dave looked intently at his son. Seeing his protruding chin and serious eyes, he realized that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Chapter 3. Laura stunned Pete at the hotel reception desk by asking for a room on a different floor. She booked it for 2 days with the option to extend and asked for first choice if the room was fully booked. Pete checked into the hotel and looked questioningly at Laura. He was told to think about it, go to his room, unpack his things and meet her in the lobby in 2 hours. He agreed, feeling confused. They met at the appointed time. Peter didn't hesitate and, seeing what Laura was wearing, decided he wouldn't mind warming himself in her embrace. They had been close for a month, but nothing had happened beyond kissing and caressing. What's going on, Laura? Think about it, Peter. We agreed to come here together, and you get a message on your phone addressed to you personally, saying that if you touch this woman, you will regret it for the rest of your life. This message came shortly after a man who looked like your husband made a threatening gesture towards you. Do you understand me? We were driving here and my daughter told me that your husband was acting very strangely. Your husband hasn't answered my calls for the last 3 hours, which is also not like him. Pete wasn't stupid. He understood what all this could mean, but he didn't see or care how it related to him. I think there's an 80% chance that my husband knows we're here together. Don't ask me how he knows. I have no idea. I am 100% certain that if he finds out we slept together, my marriage will be over. That's a price I'm not willing to pay. If I were 100% sure he knew, I would already be on a plane home. If I knew and he didn't, how the hell could I explain why I came back so quickly without telling a blatant lie? We've been together for 25 years. He would recognize a lie in a heartbeat if he was on the ball. I'm sorry, Peter, but we won't sleep together until I call my husband and make sure he doesn't know anything. Peter was clearly disappointed by this statement. Laura realized he was about to object and interrupted him. Peter, if you were my husband and you suspected that I had left you and was seeing another man, what would you do? Easy, I'd hire a private investigator and get proof. Laura watched as logic filtered through the lust in his brain. She was still annoyed that the seriousness of her situation wasn't getting through to him. You haven't tried calling your wife since you got here? That got his attention. Peter immediately began scanning all the dark corners of the hallway, trying to spot a camera. Great, now you get it. Tonight and tomorrow, I'll sleep alone in my room. When my husband gets back from cleaning and can call me, we'll sort everything out. In the meantime, don't come to my room, don't come near me unless it's a public place, and don't touch me. If my husband calls, don't answer and don't switch the phone to voicemail. Find me as soon as possible. Here are the numbers he'll be calling from. Now kiss me on the cheek like a friend, and we'll go our separate ways. Peter did as he was told, and they both went to their rooms, looking around for surveillance cameras. If either of them had bothered to look at the phone number from which Peter's threat had come, they would have realized that Laura was already 80% under surveillance. She just didn't know it yet. Chapter 4. 4 days passed, and the long-awaited trip was not going according to plan. They ate at the hotel restaurant and avoided any physical contact. Laura protested, dragging Peter to numerous shops in search of outfits, and on Tuesday, they even went on a day trip. If they were being followed, it was by professionals. Laura insisted that they spend all their days together in case Dave called. On Monday, Laura bought an old mobile phone and asked Peter to practice switching to it in case of a call. Her stress level rose only slightly. The school holidays were approaching, and it was quite possible that Dave had taken Danielle and Larry to the cottage for more than just a weekend. However, the fact that Sarah was not responding to emails was seriously worrying. Peter held out until Tuesday evening. He went to bed early. On Wednesday, Laura was so upset that she spent the whole day in her room searching for information on the internet. She was looking for information about divorce. Then she wrote an email to her family lawyer and asked him to confirm her assumptions about the outcome of a hypothetical divorce. He handled all of the family's personal legal matters. He handled all of these matters for the family. He replied that although it was not his area of expertise, he believed her assumptions to be correct. Dave and Sarah called 3 times a day, but no one answered. The 80% mark was approaching 90%. Emotionally cut off from everyone she knew, she felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She sent Sarah an email asking her to contact her. Dave did not use email. When she didn't hear back by Friday, Laura decided to secure her future. She asked her solicitor, who had all the necessary powers, to freeze the family finances. She transferred ownership of the only remaining vacant plot of land to a trust of which she and Sarah were trustees. All signatories would have access to the trust. She transferred most of the family finances into 2 separate trusts in the names of their minor children. There were again 2 trustees, but this time both signatures were required, the child and one other person. Of course, she wanted to be the second trustee, but her solicitor persuaded her to make him the child's guardian. He assured her that it would be safer that way. Of course, the child's signature had no legal force until he turned 18. Satisfied that her wallet was under control in case the worst happened, and that if it all turned out to be a storm in a teacup, she could reverse the changes, Laura slept better than she had all week. On Saturday, within an hour of each other, 2 bombshells dropped. The first was delivered by Pete, who came to her room against her instructions. Concerned that his wife was not answering, he contacted his brother and asked him to come to their house. His brother said he had done so. Pete's wife asked him where his brother wanted him to take the divorce papers. She called him at work and found out that he was not on a business trip, but on his annual holiday. This explained how Dave knew about it. Peter immediately flew home to try to deal with the aftermath. Laura immediately contacted her solicitor and asked him to sign all the changes, accompanied Peter to the airport, and moved into the vacant room. The second bombshell was closer to home and much more devastating. She started checking her 2 younger children's Facebook accounts. Nothing had been posted since she left. No hints about what they were doing, no replies to requests to contact her or somehow confirm their existence. This time, there was a new message on Larry's account. It informed everyone who wanted to know that his mother and father were getting divorced. No! Laura screamed in the empty room far away from her family. What the hell was David doing? The divorce was followed by conversations, arguments, and explanations. Yes, sometimes even goodbyes. And the children? She was the main breadwinner in the family and worked hard. It was inevitable when David dropped out of school and went to college. Of course, that meant David was the main influence in their children's lives, but this shit had gone too far. She prayed to any god who would listen that he would read the signs and stop her and Pete before their plans came to fruition. If that didn't happen, David would soon have irrefutable proof from a private investigator that nothing had happened. And now that Peter was gone, nothing would happen. When she calmed down, she began to think rationally. When no one was talking to her, she used her considerable intelligence to try to understand impartially what Dave had seen. She made several reasonable assumptions. Someone had found out about her trip to Bali. It couldn't have been Dave. The only evidence of the plan was on the home computer, and Dave didn't know how to use a computer. This someone was probably Peter's wife, who had told Dave, most likely on the morning of the departure. All he could have known was that she had lied about her destination and was flying with Peter. Unless... the letter. What if Sarah had disobeyed her instructions not to read the letter? What if Sarah had told her father what it said? Laura quickly took out the letter and read it without closing her eyes. It took her 3 attempts, each accompanied by a racing heartbeat. Point 1. A simple statement of facts, no problems. Point 2. Preparation for distortion of the truth, but otherwise facts. Point 3. Partly true, partly complete lies, and now he could see that. He was a wonderful lover, but she was tired of his embraces. It was obvious to her, and if he had seen the letter, it was obvious to him too. A private investigator's report would show that the presence of a friend here was inappropriate, and the presence of a male friend, about whom her husband knew nothing, was inappropriate. In the cold light of reason, she realized that if he had sent her that letter with blatant lies, everything else would have immediately aroused suspicion. Consequently, her assurances of fidelity would have been useless. If she went back to the beginning, her words about him being a wonderful lover would also have aroused suspicion. Suddenly, she understood what his main problem was. Peter was right. She had undermined Dave's entire belief that he satisfied her. His pride would be deeply wounded, but she hadn't cheated on him. The private investigator's report would confirm that, at least as far as this trip was concerned. Of course, he could assume that she had started cheating before the trip, but Laura already had a plan to refute that. When did the private investigator start following her? If they had been watching her since she checked into the hotel, they should have known by now that she had booked a room for two. Laura thought, too many unknowns. The fourth paragraph, which had seemed so thoughtful and loving when she wrote it now, if he had decided it was all a lie, was just empty rubbish. Like the whole letter, when she thought about it in hindsight. It turned out to be a complete lie. Laura really hoped he hadn't seen it. Conclusion: if he hadn't seen the letter, she had work to do. If he had, she suspected that no amount of trickery would help. The irony of the situation almost made her smile. Her only salvation at the moment was the private investigator's report proving that nothing had happened in Bali. Laura hoped that the private investigator was good, but consoled herself with the thought that he was so good that she hadn't noticed him, hadn't even been aware of his presence. Laura metaphorically kicked herself. Why had she done it? She spent the whole night thinking about it under the influence of alcohol. Laura came to the conclusion that she was a classic wife who had everything but saw a future different from her past and was upset about it. A successful wife and high-powered businesswoman who had spent her entire career lying, hiding all possible options, and yes, cheating. A woman approaching menopause who had developed an itch that needed scratching. So, relying on her wits and her husband's naivety, she scratched it without consequence. The new irony did not make her smile. Laura realized that she could soon be a successful businesswoman and a divorced woman who still hadn't scratched that damn itch. The next morning, since there were no signs that she would get answers to her questions here, Laura decided to return home as soon as possible. First, she decided to use her negotiation skills to delay her hero's irreversible steps. She wrote a letter to David through Sarah. Laura wrote the letter vaguely because she didn't know if Sarah had shown the letter to her father or even read it. Her plan was to try to get out of the divorce situation, but hope that, in the worst case, she would come out on top. Since she was a person who could foresee events, she found counselors in her city and made an appointment with the one she chose on the internet. Then she dressed for the day trip she had booked 4 days ago. She would still have time to call the airline. Chapter 5. Sarah enters her father's house and hears the end of a conversation between her father and a neighbor. So, besides telling Peter's wife about your suspicions, what else have you done, Dave? Nothing. Hey, Sarah. You know John Smith from next door, right? He's a lawyer, too. He kindly agreed to give me some advice. Oh, come on, Dave. After all the landscaping advice and help you've given me over the years, not to mention all the tools you've lent me, it's the least I can do. Hi, Sarah. Hi, John. Are you here to help Dad with the divorce? Now, who's talking about divorce? All we know for sure is that your mom lied to us and is spending 2 weeks in Bali with someone else. I, for one, am going to wait and hear her side of the story before I decide to divorce her. Forgive my absent-minded father, John. He can be very naive sometimes. Yesterday, my mother's lawyer called me and asked me to sign a trust agreement that effectively strips Dad of control over some family assets. We checked all the bank and investment accounts and found that most of the money is gone. She's doing everything she can to push you out, Dad. Admit it. This finally shows her true colors. Sarah handed her father the 2 pages of the printed letter. He read it and then passed it to John. Dear Sarah, print out the attached letter and give it to your father. Once again, please do not read it. It concerns our personal relationship. Dear David, I think you already know that I lied to you about the purpose and destination of my trip this week. When I return, we will talk about it. And I hope you will listen to my apologies for the huge mistake I made, with the same patience you have always shown me. Just know 2 things and please do not do anything until we talk. First, I love you and only you, always have and always will. Second, since we became a couple, I have been faithful to you all these years. I have never been with anyone else but you. I admit that my recent actions have given you enough reason to doubt this, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to convince you otherwise. I suggest you take a lie detector test when I return, hopefully in the next few days. I am willing to stop and take it on the way from the airport if you can arrange it. You can prepare the questions yourself and ask anything you want. Once this elephant is out of the room, I can apologize for any disrespect you feel I have shown you. Please, please don't do anything rash. We both know where divorce will lead. You'll lose the home you've put your heart and soul into and half the money we plan to spend on your early retirement. Think about the children. Divorce always tears families apart, and if you ask around, you'll find that the mother always gets custody. Sarah and Daniel are on my side, that's for sure. It would be a tragedy if a divorce drove a wedge between them and Larry. I know you love the children, and we both understand that not being able to see them whenever you want would destroy you. So please don't do anything until you give me a chance to explain. See you soon. Your loving wife, Laura. John finished reading the letter. Wow, if we didn't know what she was doing behind his back, this would be really convincing and emotional stuff. What do you mean, John? Well, Dave, you have to understand that in my line of work, I see all kinds of tricks. This one's pretty common. Your wife decides she wants a divorce. She looks for a replacement, finds one, and decides to give it a try during a 2-week holiday. I believe it's called a fling. Usually, if she decides he's the one, she comes back, quietly takes all the assets out of your control, and then files for divorce. The really smart ones poison the relationship between the innocent parents and their children first. Like Laura started doing with Sarah. Writing a letter portraying you as a weakling, which Sarah was allowed to find, is one of the most sophisticated moves I've ever seen. The best way to win a divorce is to deal your partner a crushing blow, limit their access to good advice, i.e., leave them penniless, and then force the children to choose which parent to stay with. In this case, the choice will be between the comfort of their mother in the family home and a homeless father living in the slums. There must be another explanation. I can prove it. Contact the 3 best divorce lawyers in town. The one or ones who refuse to take your case already represent her. I'm willing to bet she gave them all a down payment not to take your case. If you go broke and find a better lawyer, this bluff has a better chance of working. What bluff? This whole letter is a bluff, Dave. Her lawyer has probably already told her that a mother cannot get custody of children your age, especially considering that you have every chance of being recognized as the primary guardian. Dave, the purpose of this letter is simple. She wants you to do nothing while she finishes setting up her ambush. Her problem is that you found out about her plan before it was fully developed. Once her plan is in place, she will want to get divorced as soon as possible. Definitely before Larry turns 14 and can decide for himself which house he wants to live in. You can expect her to insist that you see a psychologist. In this country, the court will only grant a divorce if you have lived apart for 12 months, or if a psychologist has confirmed that the marriage is beyond repair. Expect her to choose the psychologist and intimidate you. Threats at the end of the conversation are common for women initiating divorce. Dave walked away, asking John who the best divorce lawyer in the area was. Dave called, gave the name, and asked for an appointment. He was told they couldn't take his case. Dave didn't know that the best divorce lawyer in town was very busy and had asked his secretary not to take any new cases. Dave returned to the break room. Okay, John, I believe you. What do I do now? First, you give me power of attorney to freeze all financial assets that Laura does not already have access to. Then you restrict her ability to spend any other joint financial assets. How do I do that? Well, for starters, cancel all credit cards in both of your names. Okay, but I'm still a little nervous. After all, she's so sure she still loves me. But that doesn't fit with the threats in the second half of the letter. Dad, are you sure Mom lied to you? Yes, Sarah. Do you lie to the people you love, Dad? No, I don't. What did you always tell us about the 3 pillars of a successful relationship, Dad? Love, trust, and respect, right? How many of those do you have left? Well, 1, if you're going to bring it up. And how many of those does Mom show you right now? None. There you go. Chapter 6. When Laura went to pay the fee for changing her flight, both of her credit cards were declined. She rushed to the ATM she usually used. They didn't work either. She switched to emergency mode. Her hotel and meals had been paid for in advance, so she wouldn't starve or end up on the street. She had a few £100 in traveler's checks just in case, but that wasn't enough. With no friends at home to borrow money from, her parents were her only option. Asking them to transfer money would lead to questions she didn't want to answer at the moment. She quickly sent an email to her solicitor asking what was happening with the bank accounts, then plunged into a boring, meaningless week before her planned departure. She was puzzled by how her simple, foolproof plan to scratch an itch could have so quickly led Dave to ruin. She knew he would never forgive her for cheating on him, and she had consciously taken the risk, knowing that the chances of getting caught were slim to none. What could have prompted him to take such a radical step? He suspected she was having an affair with another man, and he already knew that he had left and that nothing had happened. He couldn't have known about her financial shenanigans. He didn't even know who their financial advisor was. He had always trusted her with such things. As she quietly banged her head against the table in her room, two letters arrived that did nothing to improve her mood. The first was from Pete's wife, who ironically thanked her for destroying her marriage and jeopardizing her children's secure future. This could have hurt her deeply if the second letter hadn't arrived while she was still processing the first. At first, it looked like one of her own letters to Peter, written 2 weeks ago, in which she had eagerly anticipated the trip. The address was both his and hers, so the letter had been forwarded to her. Attached to the letter was a simple question. "Why did you lie to us, Mum?" The letter was signed Daniel. Her husband might have been computer illiterate, but the children weren't. She realized for the first time that Dave wasn't the only victim of her deception, nor was he the only one being punished. She also realized that the letter didn't answer her simple question. It also revealed Sarah's insensitivity in a new light. Laura cried over her loss and disappointment. She then sent Danielle a letter, which basically said that she would explain the misunderstanding when she got home. Her daughter must have been expecting this because the reply came immediately. "It's strange that you decided to spend your school holidays with another man instead of with Dad and us." Laura cried again. It was an extremely tense and boring week. Due to her limited budget, she had no choice but to lie on the beach. She grabbed her towel. An hour later, she left the beach and returned to the hotel. She realized that coming home with a beautiful tan would be tantamount to proving once again to everyone that they were lying. Overcome with disappointment, she sent a long letter home via Sarah. Without going into details, she wrote about her mistakes, about how she was taken for granted as a wife, mother, and breadwinner. The letter even mentioned her self-esteem in a "this is my excuse" kind of way. It mentioned twice that she had not slept with anyone but Dave during their marriage. The letter again urged her not to do anything rash until she had a chance to talk. There was not a word of apology in the letter. This was not the style of a strong businesswoman who knew she was in a position of power. She pressed send and settled down to wait. Chapter 7. Children, it's time to have a serious talk about what we're going to do when Mum comes home. I'm a little surprised she decided to stay there, and unless we hear anything new, we'll have to assume she'll be back on Friday as planned. How are we going to proceed? Remember, all we know is that she planned to leave with a guy from work. We don't know if this is the first time she's lied to us. Sarah, you go first. Well, reading her last letter was enough for me, Dad. It shows that she's just a self-satisfied bitch who treats us like minor inconveniences that can be circumvented. The fact that she cheated on us the first time is irrelevant, in my opinion. She had a choice. She could have taken her annual holiday and spent it with her family, or she could have used it to run off with someone else. She already spends so little time with Danielle and Larry because of her long working hours and business trips. I think her behavior before and after she was found out is just disrespectful to all of us and dishonest. If she doesn't change her behavior, I'm done with her. Okay, Sarah. That's harsh but fair. What do you think, Daniel? I think she just doesn't understand, Dad. I agree, dear. When we hear from Larry, I'll explain what I'm going to do. Larry? I don't care, Dad. As long as I get to stay with you. I'll do everything I can to make that happen, son. Tell us about your idea, Dad. Well, I think for some reason your mum has lost her way, I don't know. But it seems like last year's promotion has caused some changes. Children, I hope you will support me. I think if she admits what she has done and is truly sorry, we should give her another chance. What do you say? Sarah looked at her younger brothers and sisters and felt that they agreed with her. Little children just need stability until they reach the age when they reject everything their parents believed in and try to change the world. You're right, Dad. We'll try, but you saw her last letter. I read it 16 times and couldn't find any remorse. Strangely enough, I believed her when she wrote that she had never been unfaithful to you. I agree, Sarah. That's why I've prepared a little shock for her. When she experiences it, she'll realize that we believe she has already committed a crime against the family. I don't think she realizes how hurt we are, so she'll focus on the physical impact. Once we make her understand how we feel, the main question will be what she does. If she breaks down and apologizes to all of us, we'll talk about it. If not, we'll see. That's my plan. Chapter 8. The reply caught Laura off guard. It was from Sarah, but addressed to Dave and all 3 children. It outlined her schedule for her return. After reading it, she felt uneasy. It was as if she had failed in her task. She was supposed to return late on Friday evening. The letter said that she had an appointment with a polygraph examiner and that all 4 rebels would be questioned. After the test, she would be put up in a motel for 2 nights so she could think about her response. At any time on Saturday afternoon, she could request a meeting to discuss the future of the family. Laura resented being ordered around, but decided to play along with their little game for now. One thing was clear. Once she swallowed her pride, she was in for a serious showdown. People needed to know who was boss in the house. Relieved, she relaxed a little. She was glad that her offer to take a lie detector test had been accepted. It was the surest way to convince Dave that she had kept her promise. She knew that if she could convince Dave, everything else would fall into place. What questions would he ask? He knew about her behavior in Bali. That was obvious. The main question he would ask would be whether she had done anything with Pete before Bali. If he asked her directly, "Did you sleep with Peter or anyone else besides your husband?" she would have the upper hand. She was afraid he might ask more insidious questions, such as, "Have you always behaved as a wife should?" And then she would be on shakier ground. She had nothing to do with Peter in the strict Bill Clinton sense of the word. Before Pete, there was Michael. They hadn't slept together either, but only because Mike had chickened out at the last minute. Laura realized it was a mistake to ask such leading questions. She knew that polygraphs relied on indicators such as heart rate and perspiration. By answering questions literally, she risked increasing her stress level and causing a false positive reaction. However, she still practiced answering her simple-minded husband's leading questions. Generally relaxed, she arrived at the airport at the appointed time. She deliberately did not tell anyone what time her flight was arriving. Under the pretext that everyone would be busy with work or school, she insisted on taking a taxi. Her family would not be waiting for her in the international terminal when she arrived at the domestic terminal, would they? After passing through customs, she couldn't help comparing how she had arrived with how she had imagined it. Instead of purring like a contented kitten, she arrived with her arm outstretched. After the taxi ride, she sat in the polygraph waiting room for an hour until one of the technicians escorted her into the room. He outlined the basic procedure of preliminary questions to calibrate the equipment to her physiological characteristics. Then the technician pulled out a folder and frowned. "Ah, yes, here it is." Laura blushed slightly. Knowing the nature of the questions, she realized that the operator would soon guess her recent history. "Mrs. Brown, my questions are in a rather unusual format. Instead of the usual list of questions, they are presented in a flowchart." "What?" "Yes, I've seen this a couple of times before. First, the first question is asked, and then, depending on the answer, the next question is offered. It slows down the process a little, but I assure you that it does not affect the accuracy of the test results. Are you ready to begin?" "Ready as always." The operator moved on to the 8 calibration questions, then paused to open the file again and read. Question 9. 2 weeks ago, did you travel to Bali with the intention of doing this with Mr. Peter O'Ware? Yes. The operator looked at the polygraph readings and made a note. Then he looked at the file. Laura wasn't surprised by this question. She braced herself for the next one. Would it be a question about whether she had actually done it with Pete in Bali, or a question about whether she had done it with Pete before the trip to Bali? She desperately hoped that the question would be phrased in such a way that she could plausibly deny it. To a simple question like, "Did you have sex with Peter O'Waller?" she could answer no and walk away. "Please don't make this difficult." The technician closed the file and began removing the papers from the machine. "Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I have an email address where I can send the report. You can go now." To say that Laura was stunned was an understatement. What the hell does that mean? What, just one question? Yes, unusual. I've only seen one like it before, and I know that guy was trying to say something. I think whoever wrote these questions was too. Is he your husband? Laura nodded mechanically. What was he trying to say, because I don't understand? I'm guessing your husband wants to say that he doesn't care if you had an affair in Bali. He just wanted to make sure you were going to do it. He's saying loud and clear that he's fine with your intention to sleep with this guy from Peterborough. Good luck, Mrs. Brown. There are some good divorce lawyers' business cards on the administrator's desk. Laura left the room in a daze. Her entire defense, her entire education had been built on convincing her husband that she hadn't slept with another man. With no professional experience, she had no idea how deeply he had been hurt by her dishonesty and simple intentions. Disappointed and angry, Laura made her final mistake. Ignoring the opportunity to go somewhere to give herself time to make a rational decision, she jumped into a taxi and drove home. In her mind, it was now a battle of wills. Her competitive instincts had been awakened. Dave had fired the first shot, and now it was her turn to respond. The taxi dropped her off at the entrance to her neighborhood. From a car on the opposite side of the street, Dave, Daniel, and Larry looked at each other sadly as they watched the enraged woman head towards her former family home. They were grateful that they had done everything necessary the night before. The last thing Dave wanted was to be humiliated in front of the children. It would definitely be bad for their health. They made their way to the room they had booked for Laura and made sure their phones were turned off. Chapter 9. There was no word from Laura until Monday. The hope that she had used the time to think things through soberly was slim, but it was still there. The last hope vanished when Dave received an email from Sarah late on Monday evening. In it, she condemned him for the despicable methods he had used to turn the children against her. The letter stated that her lawyer was arranging an emergency family court hearing to decide on temporary custody of Danielle and Larry. Playing on John's predictions, the letter also stated that she had arranged a meeting with a psychologist for them the following day. The family meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening. Laura thought about the situation over the weekend and, as usual, came up with a plan that she thought covered all the bases. First, she would try to save the marriage that Dave seemed to have already written off. To do that, she would need to see a psychologist. Of course, she would go to a female counselor so that she would have a better chance of explaining her point of view to her husband. Secondly, family counseling sessions to explain her actions to her children. Thirdly, of course, court, so that if the worst came to the worst, she would come out on top. Laura was already in the counselor's office when Dave arrived on Tuesday, right on time. He was immediately attracted to the woman in her 40s who was dressed like a woman in her 60s. The chairs were facing the psychologist, but at a distance of more than an arm's length. After introductions, during which Laura was Laura and Dave was Mr. Brown, the aging hippie suggested that Laura speak first. Laura told the story of their marriage and then presented the facts as she saw them. She had been a faithful wife and mother until, for some reason, she had strayed, lied to her family, and gone on a date with another man. There had been no sex, as her husband, who had been watching her, confirmed, but there had been intent. When she left, she was stunned to find that her credit cards had been blocked. She regretted what she had done, and her most sincere desire was to simply forget about the episode and continue living with David. The counselor looked at Dave. First of all, I would like to say that I am speaking on my own behalf and on behalf of our children. My children's main complaint is that their mother lied to them, used 2 weeks of her annual leave, which lasts 6 months, to go away alone, and left her phone number so that she could not be contacted in case of an emergency. To be honest, I didn't ask anyone to follow Laura to Bali. This stunned Laura. Since it was the first thing she had to do, she couldn't believe it was true. In fact, I didn't even want to believe she was cheating on me until our youngest daughter hacked into Laura's email and found evidence of arrangements she had made with her lover. Also, to be clear, I was advised to block my credit cards after my eldest daughter discovered that my wife had blocked all the family accounts, leaving me without any funds. Laura was stunned again. She had no idea that her precautions had been discovered and hadn't considered how such actions might be interpreted. The fact that both her daughters were actively working against her didn't help her mood either. As for what my wife wants out of this process, I'm sorry to say that I no longer believe a word she says. The anger in his words finally made Laura realize how much her actions had hurt her husband. Before she could respond, the counselor turned to Dave. So what do you hope to achieve from these sessions? I want to understand why my wife thinks it's okay to cheat on her family and have fun with another man. At this point, David and Laura's marriage could still have been saved. But everything changed in an instant, and it wasn't the husband and wife who were to blame, but the counselor, who muttered almost in a whisper, "Oh, we have a dinosaur." David, who thought Laura had arranged all this to speed up the divorce and had deliberately chosen this counselor to minimize the chances of reconciliation, jumped out of his chair. He had heard of counselors like this and thought it was just wrong. He ran out of the room. Laura, who had a small chance of avoiding disaster if she had run after David and apologized to him, took out her anger on the counselor. By the time she had finished beating her up, David had already left. The counselor apologized and persuaded Laura to come for an individual session the following week. She then apologized to David for her inappropriate behavior and also had an individual session. This was the third mandatory session, after which a decision would be made on whether to continue or discontinue therapy. Chapter 10. The family meeting the next day was no better for Laura. She just didn't understand. As soon as someone lies, trust becomes a footnote in history books. just above woolly mammoth tusks. Before the meeting, she invited everyone to dinner, but Sarah reminded her that she couldn't cook and said that everyone would be there at 7:30. Laura tried to hug everyone when they came in, but they all treated her very coldly. Laura made the mistake of sitting down at the table last. By the time she was ready, she found herself alone facing four staring eyes from the sofa. She tried to convince her best friend Sarah to sit next to her, but to no avail. Disappointed again, she began her prepared speech. It contained few apologies and many, "I didn't do anything," and excuses. She felt unappreciated as a woman and as the primary breadwinner of the family. She had taken her husband's attention for granted and began to miss the attention that single women take for granted. She began to feel unattractive for her age. When a younger man started paying attention to her, she succumbed to his charms. During the conversation, Laura tried to focus on Danielle and Larry. She found it difficult to meet Dave's gaze, and Sarah made irritated notes in her notebook behind her raised knees. Finally, the silence of those she had come to call the opposition bench silenced her as well. Sarah spoke up. "Damn it, Mum, you've disappointed me again." "What? Why?" "I can only give you 85% on your cliché test. If you had mentioned that it wouldn't hurt anyone if they didn't know, I would have given you 1%. No one knew if Laura blushed with anger or because she realized she had wanted to say the same thing but had forgotten. Whatever the reason, she knew she would get no sympathy from her children as long as David controlled their hearts and minds. "David, in the kitchen, now, please." Laura pounced on him as soon as they were alone behind the closed door. She hissed at him, her teeth clenched. "Dave, does it have to be this way? I'll break you until you're crawling at my feet begging for forgiveness." Dave looked at her sadly, knowing that she was still a slave to her nature. "No, there's no need for that. If you just do what you think is the honorable thing to do, the outcome isn't necessarily inevitable. If you abandon that stupid bitch you chose as your impartial advisor and we go to... See you in court, David." Chapter 11. On Thursday, Dave moved into a rented three-bedroom house. The case was clearly not going to be resolved anytime soon. He was also informed that the preliminary hearing in the custody case involving Danielle and Larry was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Upon learning the name of the judge assigned to his family court case, he called John. John told him he was lucky and that he had chosen the same judge who had never granted custody to his father. David declined John's offer to represent him, but asked for a meeting over the weekend to learn about the procedures and what he could and could not say. He was going to figure out the system and then return to his tactics. He was doing what he had to do to ensure the emotional well-being of his children. The weekend was spent cheerfully settling into the rented house. Dave sat the children down and told them honestly what the immediate future would look like and what his long-term plans were. They perked up and joined in the planning. Together, they searched the internet for everything they needed. On Tuesday, Laura's lawyer was a little shocked to learn that Dave intended to represent himself. He realized how awkward it would be for Laura to be questioned by her own husband. The court closed late that day, so only administrative matters could be discussed before the end of the session, and everyone had to appear in court the next day. Overnight, the news reached several local reporters during what had been a quiet week for news. The next day, Laura's lawyer began by discussing property ownership, relatives' incomes, and other details. Then Dave began asking questions. Laura was clearly nervous, which did not go unnoticed by the journalists. He began cautiously. "Did I build the family home with my own hands?" "Yes, you did. But I was busy with work and earned most of the money." "Did you go back to work 2 months after the children were born?" "Yes." "Who usually prepared breakfast, lunch, and dinner for our children?" "You did. I worked a lot." "Would you say I was the primary caregiver?" "Probably." "Recently, you lied to me and the children and went to Bali for 2 weeks with the sole purpose of spending time with another man?" "Objection, Your Honor. Someone tell Mr. Brown that in this country, adultery is no longer a factor in a child custody dispute." "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't care about adultery. I just want to emphasize the character of my wife, who considers herself a good mother." "Objection. Overruled." "So?" "I went to Bali because I needed a holiday. And it just so happened that I went with a friend from work, yes." "When you left for Bali, lying to your family, did you leave the following letter for your husband to find?" Dave read the letter in its entirety. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that both reporters were frantically taking notes. Laura did not answer the question. Her angry gaze said it all. It was humiliating. Is it true that after returning from your despicable trip, you never once tried to apologize to your husband and family for your deception and clearly immoral intentions? Again, there was a stern response. Silence. Your Honor, your decision seems simple. I am the primary guardian of my minor children and always have been. They should be handed over to me along with the house I built, and where they have lived most of their lives. I have never cheated on my wife or told her and the children blatant and hurtful lies, and I demand that she retract her words. Her actions have shown that she is incapable of influencing my children. Dave leaned back in his chair, turning away from Laura. Her angry eyes tried to burn a hole in the back of his head. By this point, the judge was fully awake and immediately handed down her decision. The gist of it was that countless studies had shown that in cases of divorce, it was always better for children to live with their mother. According to her decision, temporary custody of the children and residence in the family home were granted to Laura. Laura smiled smugly. Dave remained impassive. This was exactly what he had expected after his conversation with John. He stood up. Your Honor, may I address the court? I would like to draw your attention to your own decisions in the cases of Harper v. Harper, Smith v. Smith, Fulton v. Fulton, and others too numerous to list, in which you awarded custody to the primary caregiver. Receiving no response from the judge, Dave cited 3 academic articles refuting the claim that children are always better off living with their mothers. What are you getting at, Mr. Brown? I'm just wondering, Your Honor, if a man can win in your court. The judge stared at Dave. He stared back at her in shock. Then she declared the case closed and set the next hearing date. Reporters frantically took notes. Dave walked over to them and handed out copies of Laura's letter. Then he walked out without looking back. Laura's lawyer approached her and congratulated her. She was in no mood to celebrate. Dave's statement that she didn't regret her actions in the slightest had hit her hard. Unfortunately, her reflex to win any fight prevented her from giving up when the game was over. Blaming his marriage on Laura's smug smile, Dave counted all those who had offended his sense of justice and needed to be re-educated. There were 3 of them, and his plans were already in place. He had already consulted with Sarah to get a second opinion and made the changes she suggested. In fact, one of her suggestions turned out to be much better than what he had come up with himself. He returned home and, through his friend in the federal government, sent a letter to the head of the federal court outlining his allegations of bias on the part of one of the judges. Then he waited for Danielle and Larry to return from school. They readily agreed to his request to spend at least the next 2 nights with their mother. Then he handed them the equipment for the second phase of his plan. The next day, 2 articles appeared in the newspapers, both of which were unfavorable to Laura and the judge. Dave cut them out and emailed them to his friend's friend. Chapter 12. On Wednesday afternoon, Laura, unlike usual, came home on time. Daniel and Larry were home, but they made it clear that this was in protest. When they deigned to answer her questions, they kept their words to a minimum. She had to ask them to make school lunches for the next day. She hadn't done it in so long that she had completely forgotten. Finding nothing suitable in the cupboards, she ended up giving them money for the cafeteria. She returned home at 4:00 p.m. to change in time for her 5:00 p.m. counseling session. During the session, she laid out her conditions for Dave's return. This took up half the session. The rest of the time, the counselor focused on the history of their marriage. Laura confessed to 2 inappropriate relationships before Peter. One was with a colleague, the other with a neighbor. She emphasized that there had been no actual sexual contact with any of the 3 friends, without mentioning that in the first 2 cases it had not been her choice. She expressed sincere confusion as to why Dave was so hurt by her actions, since nothing had happened. The counselor promised to discuss the terms with her husband, but warned that reconciliation was unlikely, given that Dave's objections appeared to be based on dishonesty and intentions rather than actions. The meeting with Dave the next day was short, abrupt, and somewhat intimidating. When asked what he wanted from the session, Dave simply offered her 2 options. Either he wanted her to be referred to another counselor who would not openly condone female infidelity, or he wanted her to sign a document stating that the marriage was irretrievably broken. A little alarmed that her statement during the first session could damage her career, the counselor quickly informed the relevant authorities that the marriage had been dissolved. She knew that another report about her to her professional organization could be the last one. When David returned home, Danielle and Larry were already there and looked quite comfortable. A police officer knocked on the door and said that he was violating a family court order. David pointed out that it was not him, but his children. The only way to evict them was by force, and that would be considered assault. The police officer asked the children to go with him, but they refused. He then left to get instructions. As soon as he returned, Laura burst into the house. "David, I've already told you that it doesn't have to be this way. Just tell Daniel and Larry to come with me. Give me the house, and I'll be generous about visitation and the division of property." "Laura, please leave my property. I won't force my children to do something they don't want to do. It will damage their sense of justice." "David, we've known each other for so many years. You know I'm not a bad person." "That's the problem, Laura. I don't know you. The woman I married would not have done what you did. Not only would she not have done what you did, but she would not only have refused to repent, she would have asked our counselor to give me an ultimatum. Tolerate your behavior or lose everything I hold dear. And especially after I found out yesterday at the counseling session that you tried to have relationships with 2 other men before Peter. Tell me, Laura, what did I do to deserve what you did to me? And what are you going to do now?" The realization that the counselor had set her up made Laura blush. Guilt prevented her from taking her anger out on Dave. But the malicious counselor was a different matter altogether. Now all of Laura's anger was directed at her. "She had no right to tell you that." Dave did not comment on this statement, either directly or indirectly. Laura stormed out. Dave walked over and wiped the voice recorder that Daniel had put in Laura's bag before the session and taken out after it. He was sure that justice would soon prevail. And he was right. 3 days later, the counselor received notice that her services were no longer required. 1 down, 2 to go. On Saturday morning, Child Protection Services arrived, but left disappointed when it became clear that the children would only leave if they were forcibly removed from the house, despite their cries and resistance. They had made a mistake in trying to apply logic to a situation filled with emotion. The senior officer told Larry, "The court has ruled that it is in your best interest to live with your mother. Then the court is wrong. Neither Daniel nor I want to live with a liar who hurt our father." That was the end of that. Laura spent the next week trying to get all 3 children back on her side. Eventually, they stopped answering her calls and immediately deleted her emails and messages on their phones. She tried to talk to Dave, but as soon as he realized there would be no apology, he cut her off. Finally giving up, he hired John as his divorce lawyer. He also went to meet with Sarah's boss to confirm her advice. At the end of the following week, he learned from Sarah that Laura was going on a business trip for the entire week. He took a vacation and did a phenomenal job helping the children after school and during work hours. Laura found out exactly what that work entailed when she returned home the following Friday. She pulled up to the house and froze in amazement. Before her was a beautiful lot with a suspended pool. There was also a brick garage. The only thing missing was her award-winning home. Her crumbling palace had been demolished. In its place stood a lonely, badly damaged building. Apparently, it had been bought at an insurance auction after being damaged in transit. In a daze, she opened the door and realized that Dave had taken care to replace the locks. All her clothes, some of her furniture, and all her personal belongings were still there. She was torn between rage and deep sadness. For a while, sadness prevailed. On the floor, right in front of the door, lay a copy of the title deed. It read, "Land and residential buildings at the address and the address." She realized that she had been cleverly deceived. The land belonged to her, and there really was a building on it. She called her solicitor to make sure that nothing could be done about the house, and then, after thinking about it, she called her financial advisor to change the only financial agreement she had made that could be changed at that point. It was a trust to which the empty plot of land had been transferred. She was told that Sarah had already exercised her right and had the documents re-registered in her name only. Laura's last act before she finally lost her mind was to curse her own arrogance for assuming that all 3 children would be on her side. Then she realized that the whole family had turned against her. Dave for stealing her house, the children for not supporting her. She was very close to admitting the full weight of her crimes, but unfortunately, self-pity gave way to anger again before she could fully realize it. She sent a letter to all 3 children. "Do you really hate me that much?" In response, she received a single reply. "We don't hate you. You always knew I would do whatever it takes to protect our family. It's just a shame you put me in a position where I have to protect them from you." Signed, Dave. Laura gathered her belongings, then went and checked into a motel. She drove through the neighborhood where Sarah lived to make sure the modules of her old house were neatly lined up, waiting to be installed and connected. On Monday at work, she received divorce papers from Dave. He apologized for filing here, but explained that he didn't know where else she might be. She spent the next hour trying to read between the lines of an agreement that, at first glance, seemed generous. It gave her 1,000% ownership of their jointly purchased property, which, considering that most of their other assets were frozen, wasn't too bad. Several expenses had to be deducted from the value of the property. These included the cost of plane tickets and hotel rooms in Bali. A note explained that these were amounts Dave believed Laura had stolen during the marriage. Also deducted were the costs of the divorce and the disclosure of her financial machinations, including half of the expected interest on the money invested in the trust for the next 2 and 5 years, respectively. She requested that custody of the children be granted to whichever parent they chose. In the interest of unity, if Danielle or Larry chose the other parent, the decision would be made by Larry as the younger parent. Family unity was paramount. Laura called her financial advisor and asked what the likelihood was that she could revoke the 2 trusts in her children's names and was told, none. He had done his job well. Through her divorce lawyer, she tried to appoint another advisor. But since the first one had already agreed to the marriage, it was impossible to do so without Dave's consent. When she demanded such consent through her lawyer, Dave reminded her that he had already suggested another advisor a few weeks earlier, but he had been rejected. Now that Laura seemed to be driven solely by the prospect of her imminent demise, it was too late. Laura signed the agreement knowing it was the best she could get. Since the family court would almost certainly award her custody of Danielle and Larry, she would receive the property held in trust for the 2 minor children as their legal guardian. This meant that she would only lose the value of the second piece of land. Once all the details were settled, the divorce went through quickly. The lawyer assured her that their case would be heard by the same family court judge, as they were within her jurisdiction and she was known for her bias. The lawyer usually advised his male clients who had dealt with her to give in and save money. Knowing that her plan for revenge was going according to plan, that she would win and Dave would be left with nothing, Laura relaxed. She wondered whether Dave's pride would allow him to take her back, in which case she would be generous in setting the terms, or whether he would resign himself to a miserable existence. Chapter 13. With her confidence restored, Laura went to court a month later. She was met by an excited lawyer. He pointed to a woman in a suit in the front row of the public gallery. "See that woman? I went to law school with her. I hear she now works in the office of the chief federal judge. Something's not right, and I don't like it." He was clearly agitated and his nervousness was contagious. The judge opened the hearing, announcing that this was her last case, as she was retiring early. She did not seem thrilled about it. Then the lawyers began their case. Laura objected to Dave, who demanded that all court costs be borne by Laura. He suggested that Laura pay Dave's expenses and Dave pay Laura's. John disagreed, pointing out that he was representing Dave pro bono. From that point on, things went downhill. John painted an accurate picture of the couple and their relative merits as guardians. Laura's lawyer could do little. He seemed to regret trusting the judge's protocol and not preparing enough factual evidence. The court proceedings lasted all morning and were clearly one-sided. The judge again ruled on the case, glancing frequently at the woman in the suit in the courtroom and speaking as if she had glass shards in her mouth. She stated that the facts of the case were simple and that Dave, as the primary caregiver, should be awarded custody. She even congratulated him on the generous offer he had made to Laura regarding the division of property and expressed hope that he would be able to raise the children well on the share he had agreed to accept. Her voice sounded insincere throughout. Laura was so shaken that she did not hear the judge's final gavel. She returned to her lonely one-room flat and wondered what bus had hit her. However, she couldn't wallow in self-pity. She had a court case pending over the division of property. While waiting for a financial decision, she put her old house up for sale. It was in a steep, inconvenient neighborhood, suitable only for a very specific type of home, and the price she agreed to set for it was very low. Unless someone recreated her old house exactly, she would have to give up even the landscaping. It used to be magnificent, but only thanks to Dave's ingenious design. Today was a moving day. She wanted to hand over the title deeds to the new owners herself and wish them well in their new home. She was disappointed when the man who was there announced that he was only the new owner's agent. They would be there soon, if she wanted to wait. When Laura saw David's car followed by 4 trucks carrying her old house and a crane, she decided to leave. In her new home, she looked at the meager check she was holding in her hand. All she had managed to get after her successful life had turned into a disaster. Still a little dazed, she wrote in her diary that her friend had advised her to seek help in dealing with the situation. She took a red marker and wrote in big, bold letters, "Next time you have a craving, go to the damn pharmacy. Next time you start messing things up, say sorry for God's sake. You're twice as smart as you think you are." About 8 weeks after she was supposed to do it, Laura went to eat some pie. She bought a bottle of champagne to congratulate the new owners of the house on their move. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.